So now, if we think about school and school issues, a quote I think I've already shown in one of the other modules from me, just making the point that children with charge syndrome are truly multi-sensory impaired. And then another quote from me where I say most people with charge I've met satisfy the criteria for being considered as having deaf blindness, even if they have some useful vision and hearing. Deaf blindness is a disability that is defined in functional, not clinical terms. And for each individual with charge, it's mostly about difficulties in accessing information, not just from the world around them, but even from their own bodies. So even if your child with charge has quite a lot of useful vision, or with hearing aids is picking up an awful lot of sound, I think thinking of them as multisensory impaired is a useful way of approaching the educational program. And I think far from being separate and different from mainstream education, good quality deafblind educational practice in assessment, in instruction, and in evaluating the program offers significant lessons to all students and all educators. Someone like me can go into a mainstream setting and be very helpful to the staff there, even if they have no or only very minimal special education training. It really is an invaluable way of looking at children and thinking about children. But my next quote comes from my article about educational issues. I say a good and effective educational program, while being very positive and having high expectations, should always take account of the fact that everything that a child with charge syndrome does is likely to take more thought and attention and concentration and energy and time for them than it does for us. I'm coming back to the why are children with charge so lazy question. It shows a gross misunderstanding of the syndrome and what these children are having to deal with. So although nobody could be more upbeat and positive about the children than me, equally nobody could be more finger wagging and saying to people, remember, you need to get this right for that child. And that means allowing time, allowing space, clarifying things, clarifying information in order to make it as easy as possible for the child to access the information and work out what to do with it and then respond in some way. I've coped by making 3 slides from a very experienced older teacher of children with deafblindness who works at Perkins School for the Blind in Massachusetts, here in the United States. Her name is Martha Majors, and she has written quite a number of pieces about her approach to deafblind education. The first slide shows her idea of educational priorities. And I think it's interesting because if you go outside the deafblind field and you ask teachers to list their educational priorities, I think you would get a very different list than Martha's. And what Martha picks out as the main priorities: developing skills to become an effective communicator, learning how to make choices, learning appropriate social skills. If you know charge syndrome, you can read between the lines of Martha's priorities and understand why she is emphasizing these things as being really important topics to address right from the beginning. Learn to be part of a social and learning group, developing the skill of negotiation, learn how to take turns, develop organizational skills in all environments, develop strategies for coping with challenges such as anxiety and obsessive compulsive routines, and developing the ability to anticipate activities and wait for them appropriately. And as I said, if you're familiar with charge, even in just one child, you can probably already understand why somebody like Martha would emphasize those things rather than the more typical list of priorities, which often would include quite a lot of academic goals. And you can see Martha doesn't specifically include purely academic goals. They're embedded in what she says in her list, but they're not emphasized as the priority. She's thinking on a much broader way of the whole child. Then in the next slide, she talks about teaching strategies. And these are all the kinds of skills and tricks of the trade that you would want the teacher and the classroom assistants to have available if they're going to make a success of implementing the educational program with a student with charge syndrome. Working on choice making, creating a very clear sequence to activities so that the child knows where they are and what's being expected.